For 33 years, I was the reliable background noise in my own family. I sat in my cap and gown, scanning the empty seats, holding on to their promise to be there. Instead, my phone buzzed with the truth. A photo of my parents beaming at a Super Bowl party, clinking glasses with strangers while I graduated alone. That photo didn't just break my heart. It was the final receipt for a debt I was absolutely finished paying. The fluorescent lights of the accounting firm where I worked had a specific hum, a low-frequency buzz that drilled into the base of my skull by 5 p.m. For the last 2 years, that sound had been the soundtrack to my life. I would clock out of my junior analyst role, drive 45 minutes through gridlock traffic to the university satellite campus, and sit in a windowless lecture hall until 9 p.m. Learning about supply chain logistics and advanced organizational behavior. I was 33 years old. Most people my age were spending their evenings arguing about what to watch on streaming services or giving their toddlers baths. I was eating vending machine almonds for dinner and writing case studies on corporate restructuring. I did not do it for the glory. I did not do it because I loved the smell of dry erase markers. I did it because I needed to prove that I was solid. That was the word my parents used for me. Usually with a tone that suggested a sturdy, unexciting piece of furniture. Julia is solid. Julia can handle it. Julia does not need us to worry about her, but this time was supposed to be different. This was my Master of Business Administration. I had paid for every credit hour myself, taking out 0 loans, eating pasta with butter 3 nights a week to make the tuition payments. It was a grind that had worn me down to a fine, sharp edge. And when I told my parents the date of the graduation ceremony 6 months ago, I had asked for one thing. I sat them down in their living room, the one with the cream-colored carpet we were never allowed to walk on with shoes, and I looked them in the eye. Mom, Dad, I said, I know you guys are busy. I know you have social obligations, but I need you to commit to this date. Saturday, May 14th. Please. My mother had waved a manicured hand, her gold bracelets clinking together. Of course, Julia, she had said, looking at me as if I had asked if the sky was blue. We will be there, no matter what, no matter what. I held on to that phrase like a lifeline during the final. Brutal weeks of the semester, when I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation while finalizing my capstone project, I told myself it would be worth it to see them in the stands. I wanted to see them look at me not as the reliable background noise of their lives, but as the main event, just for an afternoon. But the warning signs started appearing in April. Subtle cracks in the foundation. I called my mother on a Tuesday to coordinate logistics. I wanted to make a reservation for an early dinner after the ceremony, maybe at the Italian place they like downtown. Oh, sweetie, she said, her voice distracted. She was likely organizing her shoe closet or looking at swatches for the drapes. Let us not book anything yet. Your father is trying to finalize some things with the Whitlocks. You know how unpredictable their schedule is. The Whitlocks. My stomach tightened at the name. The Whitlocks were the local royalty of our mid-sized suburban town. He owned a chain of car dealerships. She was on every charity board in the county. My parents had spent the last decade circling the Whitlocks' orbit like desperate moons, trying to get invited to their gala tables and their summer yacht parties. My parents were not poor, but they were leveraged. They leased luxury cars they could barely afford and bought clothes with logos big enough to be seen from space, all to project an image of wealth that matched the company they wanted to keep. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even, the ceremony is at 2. Dinner would be at 5. The Whitlocks do not need to be involved in my graduation dinner. We will see, she said, and I could hear the dismissal in her tone. We will see how the schedule looks, 2 weeks before the big day. I went to their house for Sunday brunch. My father was on his tablet, scrolling through sports news. He did not look up when I came in. So, I said, pouring myself coffee. I picked up my cap and gown yesterday. That is nice, he said, his eyes still on the screen. I ordered the extra tickets you guys asked for. I said, testing the water. For Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike? My mother froze mid-sip of her mimosa. She set the glass down carefully. Actually, Jules, she said, Sarah and Mike cannot make it. Something about Mike's back acting up. I knew Uncle Mike had played 18 holes of golf the day before. I had seen the pictures on social media. Okay, I said, feeling a cold prickle of dread. That is fine. Just you two then. That is all I really care about. My father finally looked up. He gave me that tight, practiced smile he used when he was trying to sell a house that had a leaky basement. We are proud of you. Julia, he said, you know that, right? The past tense. We are proud. Not, we are excited to see you. I ignored the knot in my gut. I forced myself to believe them. They had promised. They knew I had done this all alone. They knew I had spent the last 2 years exhausted. They would not miss the finish line. Graduation day broke clear and unseasonably warm. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue that hurt my eyes. I spent the morning in a fugue state of anxiety, curling my hair, checking my teeth for lipstick, pacing the length of my small apartment. I put on the black gown. It was heavy, synthetic material that trapped heat, but as I zipped it up, I felt a flicker of genuine pride. I had done it. I drove to the university arena alone. My parents were supposed to meet me at the entrance to Section 104. I arrived an hour early, standing near the designated pillar, watching families swarm around me. I saw fathers adjusting their sons' ties. I saw mothers holding massive bouquets of flowers, weeping openly. I saw grandparents in wheelchairs, beaming with fragility and joy. I checked my phone. No texts. 30 minutes to the procession. I sent a message to the group chat I had with them. I am here. Section 104. Where are you? Nothing. 15 minutes. The ushers were starting to herd the graduates toward the tunnel. Guys, I typed, I have to go line up. Are you close? My phone remained silent. I walked into the tunnel with the other graduates. The air smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat. People around me were taking selfies, FaceTiming their relatives, laughing. I walked with my head down, clutching my phone like a talisman. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe Dad's phone died. We marched out onto the arena floor to the swell of pomp and circumstance. The applause was a physical wave, crashing down from the stands. I scanned the crowd. Section 104 was to the left. I found it instantly. I counted the rows. Row F, seats 5 and 6, empty, 2 gray plastic folding chairs, stark and vacant in a sea of people. I sat down in my assigned seat on the floor. The ceremony began. The dean gave a speech about resilience and the future. I did not hear a word of it. I kept turning around, craning my neck, looking back at Section 104. Maybe they were just late. Maybe they were stuck in the parking lot. Names started being called. The line moved. I stood up when it was my turn. I walked across the stage. I shook the hand of a man I had never met. I took the diploma cover. I smiled for the camera because I was trained to be pleasant, even when I was bleeding out. I walked back to my seat. I looked at Section 104 again. Still empty. The ceremony ended. Caps were thrown. The arena dissolved into chaos as families reunited with their graduates. I stood alone by my chair, feeling like a ghost. My phone buzzed in my hand. Finally, an explanation, an apology, a frantic text about a flat tire. I unlocked the screen. It was a picture message. Not from my parents, but from my cousin, Leo. He had taken a screenshot of a Facebook post and sent it to me with a single question mark. I opened the image. It was a photo posted by Mrs. Whitlock 10 minutes ago. The caption read, Super Bowl Sunday in May, only for the champs. Love hosting these 2 wild cards. Game day 5. IP, best friends. The photo was a selfie. In the foreground, Mrs. Whitlock grinned with her veneer-perfect teeth. Behind her, in the sprawling, sun-drenched living room of the Whitlock estate, were my parents. My father was wearing a football jersey. Not just any jersey, but a custom one with the local team's colors. My mother was wearing a matching one, holding a glass of white wine, laughing with her head thrown back. They looked radiant. They looked happy. They were 20 minutes away. They were not in traffic. They were not in the hospital. They were at a party. The world tilted on its axis. The noise of the arena faded into a dull roar, like static on a dead channel. I dialed my mother. My fingers were shaking so badly I hit the wrong number twice. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice was loud, competing with the background noise of cheering and bass-heavy music. "Mom?" I said. "Oh, Julia. Hi. We were just talking about you. Where are you?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, thin and reedy. "Oh, sweetie. Look, I am so sorry," she said. But she did not sound sorry. She sounded annoyed, like I had interrupted a very important anecdote. "We hit the worst traffic getting onto the highway. It was gridlock. Your father said we would never make it in time, and you know how he gets with traffic. He gets so stressed. You are at the Whitlocks," I said. There was a pause, a beat of silence where the lie hung in the air, naked and ugly. "Well, we turned around because it was pointless to sit in the car," she said, her voice hardening. "And the Whitlocks were having this big viewing party for the classic game replay. And it is a huge networking thing for your father. Julia, you know he has been trying to get the contract for their new dealership lots. This is business. You missed my graduation." I said. "We did not miss it on purpose," she snapped. "Do not be dramatic. We will take you to dinner next week. Besides, it is just a ceremony. You already did the work. The paper is the same whether we sit on a hard bleacher or not." Someone in the background shouted, "Touchdown! I have to go," she said. "The game is getting good. We are so proud of you." "Sweetie, really." The line went dead. I stood there in my gown, the phone warm against my ear. A family bumped into me, apologizing as they tried to get around me to hug their son. "It is just a ceremony." I walked out of the arena. I did not take off my gown. I did not take off my cap. I walked to my 10-year-old sedan, got in, and started the engine. I did not drive to my apartment. I drove to the suburbs. I pulled up to my parents' house. Their cars were gone, of course. They were still at the party, but I had a key. I had always had a key. I was the reliable one. I was the one who watered the plants when they went to Cabo. I was the one who fed the cat they eventually got bored of and gave away. I let myself in. The house was cool and smelled of lemon polish and silence. But the kitchen told a different story. On the granite island, there were remnants of a pre-party, an empty bottle of champagne, a discard pile of outfit choices my mother had rejected, and there, on the counter, was a stack of mail. I saw a card envelope with my name on it. It had been opened. It was a card from my great-aunt Martha. She sent me $20 for every birthday and holiday. I pulled the card out. The $20 bill was gone. I turned the card over. In my mother's handwriting, scrawled on the back of the envelope, was a list. Appetizers for W, party, dry cleaning, tell J, traffic was bad. Tell J, traffic was bad. It was premeditated. They had never planned to come. They had decided days ago, maybe weeks ago, that the Whitlocks' party was more important than my graduation. The traffic excuse was scripted. I stood there, staring at the note. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat. A hysterical, jagged thing. The front door opened. I froze. My parents walked in. They were flushed, loud, bringing the energy of the party with them. They stopped dead when they saw me standing in the kitchen, still wearing my graduation gown, the mortarboard cap slightly askew. "Julia?" my father said. He blinked, looking disoriented. "What are you doing here?" "You are back early," I said. My mother sighed, dropping her purse on the counter. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and irritation. The Whitlocks had to leave for a dinner reservation. She said, "We decided to come back and freshen up. Why are you wearing that costume?" "It is my graduation gown." "Mom, I know what it is." She said, "I mean, why are you wearing it here? You look ridiculous standing in the kitchen like that." I held up the envelope. "You wrote the excuse down." I said, "You planned it." My father stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now you listen here, Julia. he said, pointing a finger at me. "We have supported you your entire life. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. You do not get to come into our house and interrogate us because we missed a boring speeches event to secure a business deal that could pay for your wedding someday. I am not getting married." I said, "I just got a master's degree. Today. So what?" he shouted. "Everyone has a degree these days. It does not make you special. You know what makes you special? Connections, which is what we were building for you. You are being selfish." Selfish. The word hung there. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Cousin Leo. I looked down. He had sent a screenshot of a text exchange with my mother from earlier that day. Leo had asked, "Are you guys excited for Julia's big day?" My mother's reply, "Oh, Julia actually asked us not to come. You know how she is. She is so private. She said she did not want anyone there. She just wanted to get it over with." I stared at the screen. The air left my lungs. "You told them I did not want you there," I whispered. My mother flinched, just slightly. "Well, it is true, isn't it?" she said, smoothing her jersey. "You are always so anxious. You hate crowds. We were doing you a favor. We spun it so you would not look like a loner. You spun it," I repeated. I looked at them. I really looked at them. I saw the desperation in my father's eyes, the way he needed the Whitlocks to validate his existence. I saw the hollowness in my mother, the way she treated truth as a suggestion rather than a rule. They did not love me. They loved the version of me that was convenient. They loved the daughter who required nothing and allowed them to be everything. "I am done," I said. I took the key off my ring, the silver key to their front door. I placed it gently on the granite counter, right next to the note that said, "Tell Jay." Traffic was bad. "Done with what?" My father scoffed. "The drama? Good. Go home. Sleep it off. We will call you tomorrow." I did not answer. I walked past them. I walked out the front door, down the driveway, and got into my car. I did not cry. That was the strangest part. I felt completely, utterly dry. I drove back to my apartment. It was a small one-bedroom on the second floor of a complex that smelled like curry and dryer sheets. I walked inside and locked the deadbolt. I took off the gown. I folded it neatly. I placed the cap on top of it. Then I went to my closet and pulled down a plastic bin from the top shelf. Inside, buried under old tax returns, was a blue folder. I had labeled it Exit Plan 3 years ago. After a Thanksgiving dinner where my parents had spent 4 hours criticizing my career choices in front of my boyfriend, who subsequently broke up with me. At the time, the folder was a dark joke. It contained a list of cities I had never been to, a rough budget for moving, and a few printouts of job markets. I sat on the floor and opened it. The joke was over. I looked at my bank account on my phone. I had $5,000 saved. It was money I had been hoarding for a down payment on a decent car, or maybe a trip to Europe to celebrate graduation. I looked at the map in the folder. My finger landed on a spot in the Pacific Northwest. Harbor Point. I did not know anything about Harbor Point. I knew it rained there. I knew it was 2,000 miles away. I knew no one there knew my last name. I opened my laptop. I went to an airline website. One-way ticket. Tomorrow morning. 6:30. Price, $480. Click. Booked. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Cold and sharp. I stood up and grabbed my large suitcase. I did not pack everything. I packed what mattered, my laptop, my sensible work clothes, my comfortable shoes, a few books, my toiletries. I left the furniture. I left the dishes. I left the graduation gown on the bed. I wrote a note on a piece of notebook paper. I did not want to leave it, but I knew if I simply vanished, they would call the police, not out of worry, but because it would look bad for them if their daughter went missing. I wrote, "I am safe. I am moving for a job opportunity. I am done auditioning for my own family. Do not come looking for me." I taped it to the refrigerator. Then, I sat down on my couch and took out my phone. I opened my contacts. Dad, block contact. Mom, block contact. Aunt Brenda, who always reported back to them, block contact. The family group chat, leave conversation. Silence. The silence was deafening. It was also the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I called an Uber for 4 in the morning. I sat in the dark, watching the red digits of the microwave clock change. 3:58, 3:59, 4:00. Headlights swept across my living room wall. I rolled my suitcase out the door. I did not look back at the apartment. It was just a place where I had waited for things that were never going to happen. The airport was quiet and sterile. I checked my bag. I went through security. I sat at the gate. When they called my boarding group, I stood up. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, wild rhythm. I walked down the jet bridge. I found my seat. 22A, window. The plane taxied out. The engines roared to life. As we lifted off, the ground fell away. The suburbs, the university, the Whitlock's mansion, my parents' house. It all became small. It became a grid of lights, insignificant and distant. I pressed my forehead against the cold plastic of the window. Goodbye, Julia the reliable. Goodbye, Julia the solid. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 33 years, I did not know what was going to happen next, and it was absolutely thrilling. Harbor Point did not welcome me. It simply tolerated my arrival. The air here was different from the humid, stifling atmosphere of my hometown. It was sharp, smelling of salt water and pine needles, and it carried a damp cold that settled into the marrow of my bones within an hour of stepping off the plane. I stood on the curb outside the small regional airport, clutching the handle of my suitcase, watching the rain fall. It was not a dramatic storm, just a steady gray drizzle that seemed to have been falling for centuries. I hailed a cab, a battered sedan that smelled of stale coffee, and gave the driver the address of a budget motel I had booked on my phone during the layover. The first 48 hours were a blur of cheap motel sheets and the glowing screen of my laptop. I kept waiting for the explosion. I kept expecting the police to bang on the door, or for my phone to override my block settings and scream at me, but the silence was absolute. I saw the missed calls in my notification history, stripped of their ringtones. 7 calls from my mother, 4 from my father, 2 from Aunt Brenda, and then, abruptly, they stopped. It had been 2 days. In my family, silence was never peace. It was a weapon. It meant they were regrouping, spinning a new narrative, or simply deciding that I was not worth the effort of a chase. I walked the unfamiliar streets of Harbor Point, shivering in my thin trench coat. The city was built on a slope leading down to a gray, churning bay. The buildings were Victorian and sturdy, painted in muted blues and greens. People here walked with purpose, heads down against the wind. No one looked at me. No one asked why a 33-year-old woman was wandering around at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, looking like she had just walked out of a burning building. I needed a place to live. The motel was eating through my savings at a rate of $80 a night. I found the listing on a community bulletin board at a coffee shop. Room for rent, quiet home, no pets. Must like tea. I called the number. An hour later, I was standing on the porch of a craftsman bungalow on the edge of town, shaking the hand of Mara Winslow. Mara was in her late 60s, a woman made of sharp angles and soft wool. She had silver hair cropped close to her head and eyes that were a piercing, intelligent gray. She had been a trauma nurse for 40 years. She told me as she poured hot water into a teapot in her kitchen. The kitchen was cluttered but clean, smelling of dried herbs and lemon. She watched me as I drank the tea. I was conscious of how I looked. Tired, pale, my clothes slightly wrinkled from the suitcase. I can pay the first and last month of rent in cash, I said, setting the cup down. I have savings. I am looking for work now. I am quiet. I do not have guests. Mara nodded slowly. She did not look at the cash I had placed on the table. She looked at my hands, which were trembling slightly. You have an MBA, she said, gesturing to the resume I had foolishly left on top of my folder. But you are applying for administrative assistant jobs, and you traveled 2,000 miles with one suitcase. I stiffened. I just need a fresh start. I said. Mara leaned back in her chair. Honey, she said, her voice raspy but kind. "I worked in the ER. I know the look of someone who is waiting for the other shoe to drop. So, I will ask you one question, and I want the truth. Are you running from something illegal, or are you running from something personal?" "Personal," I said immediately, "very personal." She studied me for another long moment, then she pushed the key across the table. $400 a month. You buy your own groceries. We share the kitchen. But you clean up your own mess. If you are running from a bad man, tell me so I can keep the porch light off. Not a man. I said, "Just expectations." Mara smiled, a dry, small expression. "Those are harder to outrun," she said. The room was small, with a single window overlooking the overgrown garden, but it was clean. It had a bed, a desk, and a chest of drawers. I unpacked my life in 10 minutes. When I put my laptop on the desk, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I was here. I had a key. I had a roof, and nobody knew where I was. Getting a job was the next hurdle. I was overqualified for everything I applied for, which made potential employers suspicious. They looked at my resume: Master of Business Administration, junior analyst at a top-tier firm, and asked why I wanted to coordinate schedules for a catering company. I told them I was looking for a change of pace. I told them I wanted to be closer to the creative side of business. I landed a temporary position at Cedar & Coast, a boutique event services company housed in a renovated warehouse near the docks. The owner, a frenetic man named David who always looked like he had just sprinted up 3 flights of stairs, hired me because I knew how to use pivot tables and spreadsheets. We are a mess. Julia. David told me on my first day, sweeping his arm across the open concept office where phones were ringing and fabric swatches were draped over monitors. "We are great at making things look pretty, but we are terrible at logistics. If you can organize the vendor database, you are hired." It was mindless work compared to what I was used to, but I loved it. I loved the binary nature of it. A vendor was either booked or not booked. A deposit was paid or unpaid. There was no nuance, no emotional blackmail, no, "we will see how the schedule looks." I buried myself in the work. I arrived at 8 in the morning and left at 6. I color-coded the filing system. I digitized the client contracts. I created a master calendar that actually worked. For the first time in my life, I was not Julia the daughter. I was just Julia the efficient temp. My first real test came 3 weeks into the job. Cedar & Coast was handling a massive charity dinner for a local hospital foundation. It was a black tie affair for 300 people, held in a historic ballroom downtown. On the morning of the event, the lead coordinator came down with the flu. David was panicking. He was pacing the office, pulling at his hair. "We have to cancel." He was saying to no one in particular, "I cannot run the floor and manage the kitchen at the same time. The seating chart is a nightmare. The mayor is coming." I looked up from my desk. I had memorized the run-of-show document the day before. Just out of habit, "I can run the floor," I said. David stopped pacing. He looked at me, blinking. "You have been here 3 weeks. Julia, I know the schedule," I said, my voice steady. "I know the seating chart. I know that Mrs. Gable cannot sit next to Mr. Henderson because of the lawsuit. I know the vegetarian meals need to go to table 4 and table 9. Give me a headset." David hesitated, then threw his hands up. "Fine. Do not sink us." That night, I wore my only black dress suit. I put on the headset, and I felt a calm settle over me that I had never felt in my personal life. The event was chaos disguised as elegance. The florist was late. The microphone on the podium malfunctioned 10 minutes before the speeches. A waiter dropped a tray of champagne flutes in the foyer. I handled it. I directed the florist to the service entrance. I swapped the microphone pack with the backup I had insisted we bring. I stood in front of the broken glass, directing guests around it with a smile until the cleanup crew arrived, when the salads were delayed coming out of the kitchen. I signaled the band to play an extra song to cover the gap. When the mayor arrived early, I intercepted him and guided him to the VIP bar before he could realize his table was not ready. It was a dance of logistics, and I was leading, At the end of the night, as the last guests were retrieving their coats, David found me in the back hallway. He looked exhausted but relieved. "You saved my life," he said. "I was just doing the job." I said, taking off the headset. "No," David said, "that was not just doing the job. That was command. You are wasted in data entry. Julia, I want you on the coordination team. Full time." He named a salary. It was less than I made as an analyst, but it was enough to live on. It was enough to pay Mara and buy groceries and maybe, eventually, buy a chair for my room. I took it. It was a win, a small, quiet win. But for the first time, the victory belonged entirely to me. I had not done it to impress my parents. I had not done it to earn my place at a table that was already full. I had done it because I was good at it. But the past has a way of bleeding through the bandages. A few days later, I was in the break room heating up soup for lunch. One of the other coordinators, a bubbly woman named Sarah who had photos of her golden retriever all over her desk, was complaining about her upcoming weekend. "My parents are coming into town," Sarah groaned, stirring sugar into her coffee. "My mom is going to criticize my apartment, and my dad is going to ask why I'm not married yet. I swear, families are the worst. I watch the microwave turntable spin. At least they show up." I said. It slipped out before I could stop it. Sarah laughed. "True, sometimes I wish they wouldn't. Did your parents visit you a lot?" "No," I said. I took my soup out. They actually skipped my MBA graduation to go to a Super Bowl party. I said it casually, blowing on the steam. I expected her to laugh, to roll her eyes and say, "Oh, that sucks." But the room went silent. Sarah stopped stirring her coffee. She turned to look at me, her brow furrowed. "Wait," she said. "They did what?" "They skipped my graduation," I repeated, feeling a sudden flush of embarrassment. "To go to a party, it was a networking thing." Sarah looked horrified. "Julia," she said slowly, "that is insane. You got a master's degree? And they went to a football party? It sounds worse when you say it out loud." I said, forcing a shrug. "They are just very social people." "No," Sarah said, her voice firm. "That is not being social. That is cruel. My dad is annoying, but if I graduated from anything, even clown college, he would be there in the front row with an air horn. That is not normal. Julia, not normal." The words echoed in my head for the rest of the afternoon. I had spent my entire life rationalizing their behavior. I told myself they were busy. I told myself they were stressed about money. I told myself I was too demanding. I had normalized the neglect because it was the only way to survive it. But hearing a stranger call it cruel cracked something open inside me. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed. The rain was drumming against the window pane. I opened my laptop. I had blocked them, but I had not blocked my cousin Leo. I went to Leo's social media page. I scrolled down, and there it was. 3 days ago, a repost from my mother's account. The photo was old. It was from my high school graduation. 15 years ago. I looked young and terrified in the picture. Standing between my parents, my mother was wearing a floral dress. My father had more hair. The caption read, "So incredibly proud of our girl Julia. Master's degree achieved. We are beaming with pride today. So sad we could not post photos from the ceremony due to security restrictions at the venue. But our hearts are full. Proud parents, MBA family. First, security restrictions." I felt bile rise in my throat. I ran to the bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet. They were lying. They were lying to everyone. They had rewritten reality so they would not look like the villains. They had stolen my achievement and pasted a fake smile over it. I sat on the bathroom floor, shivering. Mara found me there 10 minutes later. She knocked softly on the open door. "Julia?" she asked. "They are lying." I choked out. I showed her the phone. Mara put on her reading glasses. She looked at the post. She looked at the date. Then she looked at me. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub. "This is what they do," she said softly. Narcissists rewrite history because the truth is too inconvenient for their ego. They said there were security restrictions. I said, there were no restrictions. Anyone could take pictures. Of course there weren't. Mara said, but people who do not know any better will believe them, and that is all that matters to them. The audience. I feel like I'm going crazy. I said, maybe I am remembering it wrong. Maybe I did tell them not to come. Mara reached out and took the phone from my hand. She set it on the sink, face down. Stop, she said. Her voice was sharp, commanding the same authority she must have used in the emergency room. That is the goal. Julia, confusion is their strategy. If you doubt your own memory, they win. She went to the kitchen and came back with a notebook and a pen. Write it down, she said. What? Write it down, Mara repeated. Everything. The dates, the texts, the time they called, the excuses they gave, the note you found on the counter. Document it all. Why? I asked, wiping my face. It won't change anything. It is not for revenge. Mara said, not yet. It is for clarity. You need a record of reality so you do not gaslight yourself. When they try to spin the story again, and they will, you go to the notebook. You look at the facts. You anchor yourself. I took the notebook. That night, I did not sleep. I wrote about the graduation. I wrote about the Super Bowl party. But once I started, I could not stop. I wrote about the time they forgot to pick me up from surgery when I was 22. I wrote about the time my father borrowed $2,000 from me and told everyone I had borrowed it from him. I filled 20 pages. By morning, my hand was cramping, but my mind was clear. It was a map of damage, and looking at it, written in blue ink, I realized Sarah was right. It was not normal. It was a system of extraction. They took, and I gave. The next day was Saturday. I had the day off. I decided to follow Mara's advice and secure my perimeter. I sat at my desk and logged into every account I could think of. My bank, my student loan portal, my medical records, my email. I checked the profile section of my car insurance. Emergency contact, Linda Stewart. Mother. Phone number listed. I deleted it, replaced it with none. I checked my primary care physician's portal. Emergency contact, Robert Stewart. Father. Allowed to discuss medical results. Yes, I stared at the screen. My father had access to my medical records? I did not remember checking that box. I unchecked it. I removed his name. I went deeper. I checked my old university portal, my alumni account. I found my mother's email address listed as a secondary recovery email for my main Gmail account. If I ever got locked out, the reset link would go to her. I deleted it, with every deletion. I felt a strange mix of paranoia and power. I was cutting the invisible wires. I was making myself an island. But as I dug, I found things that made my skin crawl. On a credit monitoring site, I saw an address listed under previous residences that I did not recognize. It was a P.O. box in a town 3 hours from where I grew up. It was active 2 years ago. I had never lived there. I made a note in Mara's notebook. Strange P.O. box. Investigate. I changed every password. I set up 2-factor authentication on everything. By noon, I felt like I had built a digital fortress. I went downstairs to make tea. The mail had just arrived. Mara brought it in. Sorting through the stack, she handed me a thick white envelope. Forwarded from your old address, she said. The sticker on the front was yellow and peeling. It had been routed through the Postal Service's forwarding system, catching up to me weeks late. I looked at the return address, Mid-State Financial Services. I did not know who Mid-State Financial Services was. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a red banner across the top. Final notice. I scanned the letter. Dear Miss Stewart, this is a final notification regarding your outstanding balance on loan account 8894. Despite multiple attempts to contact you, we have received no payment since February. Total amount due immediately, $15,000. Failure to remit payment within 10 days will result in legal action and wage garnishment. I stared at the number, $15,000. My hands started to shake. I sat down at the kitchen table. Mara turned from the stove. "Bad news?" she asked. I handed her the letter. I never took out a loan. I whispered, "I don't have any debt besides my car. I paid for my MBA in cash." Mara read the letter. She looked at the date. "February," she said. "That was 4 months ago." I grabbed the letter back. I looked at the details. The loan was for home improvement/personal. It was originated in January. In January. I was studying for finals. I was working 60 hours a week. I was nowhere near a loan officer. But then I saw the signature at the bottom of the copy of the promissory note included in the packet. It was a scrawl, a loop for the J, a sharp cross for the T. It looked like my signature. It looked exactly like my signature. But I knew, with a cold, absolute certainty, that I had never signed it. I looked at the notebook lying open on the table. The notebook where I had written down the history of small betrayals. This was not a small betrayal. This was a crime. I remembered my mother's voice on the phone at the graduation. We were trying to keep the house stable. I remembered my father's obsession with appearances. I remembered the credit inquiry I had seen earlier that morning, the one I had dismissed as a glitch. They didn't just skip my graduation. They had sold me out before I even put on the cap and gown. I stood up. The kitchen seemed to tilt. "I need to make a call." I said, "Not to them." Mara said sharply, "No." I said, I looked at the phone number on the letterhead. "To the lender." I dialed the number. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was not running anymore. I had hit the wall, and now I had to turn around and fight. A robotic voice answered, "Thank you for calling Mid-State Financial. For collections, press 1." I pressed 1, and the war began. The robotic voice on the other end of the line was infuriatingly calm. It was a synthesized alto, programmed to deliver bad news with a flat, digital indifference that made my skin crawl. "Please hold while we access your file," the voice said. I sat at Mara's kitchen table, my phone pressed to my ear, my free hand gripping a pen so hard my knuckles were white. Outside, the Harbor Point rain had turned into a deluge, hammering against the roof like handfuls of gravel. It was a fitting soundtrack for the dismantling of my life. A human finally picked up. "This is Brenda in collections," the woman said. She sounded tired, the kind of tired that comes from having the same argument with strangers 40 times a day. "Can I have your full name and the last 4 digits of your social?" I gave them to her. My voice sounded steady, which was a miracle of acting. I received a final notice letter. I said, "For a loan I did not take out. I believe this is a mistake, or fraud." There was a clicking of keys on the other end. "Julia Stewart," Brenda said. "Account ending in 8894. I see the account here. It is listed as delinquent. We are preparing to forward this to our legal department for wage garnishment. I did not take out this loan." I repeated, louder this time. "When was it opened?" "January 12th of this year," Brenda recited. "And what address do you have on file?" She read off an address. It was not my apartment address. It was not my parents' address. It was the address of a P.O. box in a town called Oakhaven. My stomach dropped. Oakhaven was the town where my parents did their errands. It was where they went to the dry cleaner they liked because the one in our town ruined silk. It was where they went to the shipping store to send packages. "I do not have a P.O. box in Oakhaven." I said, "Well, that is the billing address we have," Brenda said, "and we have a signed promissory note on file. Would you like me to email you a copy of the origin documents?" "Yes," I said. "Right now." I gave her my email address. I waited. The seconds stretched out, thick and heavy. "Check your spam folder," Brenda said. It popped into my inbox. A PDF attachment. I opened it. There it was. A loan application for $15,000. The purpose was listed as home improvement. The applicant was Julia Marie Stewart. The social security number was mine. The date of birth was mine. And at the bottom of the page, in the signature box, was a terrifying approximation of my name. It was not my signature. My J has a sharp loop at the top. This J was rounded, soft, but the rest of it, the way the T was crossed, the slant of the S, it was an imitation. Someone had practiced. Someone had looked at my signature on a birthday card, or a check, or a lease agreement, and tried to replicate the muscle memory of my hand. It was not a stranger's forgery. It was intimate. "I am looking at it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That is not my signature." "Ms. Stewart," Brenda said, her voice hardening, "if you are claiming identity theft, you need to file a police report and send us the case number. Until then, the debt is valid, and the interest is accruing." I hung up. I stared at the screen. The PDF was high resolution. I zoomed in on the signature. The ink looked blue. It was a wet signature. Not digital. Someone had walked into an office, or sat at a kitchen table, and physically signed my name to steal $15,000. Mara placed a cup of tea in front of me. She did not say a word. She just tapped the notebook lying open on the table. "Document," she whispered. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of cold, clinical fury. I went to the websites of the 3 major credit bureaus. I paid the fees to unlock my full reports. I expected to find a mess. I expected to find credit cards opened at electronics stores, or payday loans with triple-digit interest rates, the kind of sloppy, desperate fraud you hear about on the news. But what I found was worse. It was clean. There were 4 inquiries in the last 6 months, 2 from Mid-State Financial, 1 from a credit card company I didn't bank with, 1 from a car leasing agency. The credit card was open. It had a limit of $5,000. The balance was $4,850. I clicked on the transaction history. It was not used for liquor or gambling. It was used for Lux catering services. It was used for Velvet Rope event rentals. It was used for a deposit at a high-end florist. It was used to fund the Super Bowl party. My parents had thrown a party to impress the Whitlocks, and they had paid for it with a credit card opened in my name. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning. This was not desperation. This was entitlement. They viewed my credit score as a family asset. They viewed my financial identity as an extension of their own. They had likely justified it by telling themselves they would pay it off before I noticed, or that the networking from the party would lead to a deal that would cover the cost. But they hadn't paid it off, and they hadn't told me. I looked at the home improvement loan again. $15,000. Where did that go? I checked the disbursement details. It had been paid out to a checking account. I didn't recognize the account number. I froze my credit files. I placed fraud alerts on everything. I downloaded every PDF, every transaction log, every inquiry timestamp. I created a folder on my laptop named Evidence. Then, I looked at my phone. I have to call them. I said to Mara. She was washing dishes. Her back to me. "Be careful," she said. "Do not give them the map. Just ask for directions." I understood what she meant. Do not tell them I know everything. See what they admit to. I dialed my father's number. I had blocked them, but I could still call out. He answered on the second ring. "Julia?" he said. His voice was guarded, stripped of the usual performative warmth. "We were wondering when you would call. Your mother has been sick with worry." I ignored the bait. "I am calling because I got a letter." "Dad," I said, "from a lender. Mid-State Financial." There was a silence on the line. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a man calculating the blast radius. "Mid-State?" he said, his voice pitching up a fraction of an octave. "I do not know who that is. Why are you calling me about your junk mail?" "It is a collection notice," I said, "for $15,000, for a home improvement loan taken out in January, in my name." Another silence. Then, the deflection. "Well, Julia, you know how careless you can be with your information," he said. "You probably clicked on some link or threw a bank statement in the trash without shredding it. Identity theft happens to everyone these days." I did not say anything. I just let the silence hang there, heavy and accusing. "Why are you so quiet?" he snapped. "Why are you digging up problems? You disappear for weeks. You run off to God knows where, and then you call to accuse us of what?" I didn't accuse you of anything. Dad, I said softly, I just said I got a letter. That stopped him. He realized he had overplayed his hand. By getting defensive before I had even pointed a finger, he had practically signed a confession. Let me talk to your mother. I said, she is resting. He said, put her on. Dad, I heard a muffled conversation. Hand over the receiver. A hiss of whispering. Hello? My mother's voice was weak, breathless. The voice of the victim. Mom, I said, did you sign my name to a loan application? Julia? She gasped. What a horrible thing to say to your own mother. Did you? We were trying to keep the house stable, she blurted out. The truth, vomiting out under pressure. The house? I said. What does the house have to do with me? I haven't lived there in 10 years. It is the family home. Julia, she said, her voice gaining strength now that the seal was broken. It is your inheritance. We had some cash flow issues. The roof needed repairs, and your father had to maintain his liquidity for the Whitlock deal. We intended to pay it back immediately. It was a bridge loan, just a bridge. You forged my signature. I said, that is a felony. Do not use that word, she hissed. We are your parents. We gave you everything. We paid for your braces. We paid for your piano lessons. You owe us. And technically, we did not forge it. We just acted as your proxy. We knew you would want to help. You are the reliable one. Julia, you always help. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, absolute and final. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. I was a credit score to be harvested. I was a safety net they could deploy without my consent. And the loan wasn't for the roof. I knew that. The credit card history showed catering and florists. The loan was likely for something just as vain, maybe the country club dues, or the lease on my father's Range Rover. I am freezing my credit. I said, and I am disputing the debt as fraud. You cannot do that. My father's voice roared back onto the line. He must have been listening on the extension. If you report it as fraud, they will investigate. They will come to us. Then you should have thought of that before you practiced my signature. I said, Julia, listen to me, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing low. If you do this, you are destroying this family. You are humiliating us. The Whitlocks will hear about it. The bank will hear about it. You will ruin everything we have built. You built it on my back. I said. I hung up. I sat there, trembling. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the severing. It was done. The ambiguity was gone. They were not just neglectful. They were predatory. Mara turned off the faucet. She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and warm. Now you know, she said. Now I know. I repeated. I did not sleep that night. But the next morning, I went to work. Work was the only place where the rules made sense, at Cedar and Coast. If there was a problem, there was a solution. If a budget was off, you fixed it. If a vendor lied, you fired them. There was no emotional blackmail in a spreadsheet. And I needed the distraction, because Cedar and Coast had just landed the biggest fish in the pond, Archer Bay Athletics. They were a massive professional sports organization, a conglomerate that owned teams, stadiums, and merchandise lines. They were planning a championship gala in Harbor Point, a weekend-long fundraising event involving athletes, corporate sponsors, and high-net-worth donors. It was the kind of contract that could make or break a small agency like ours. David, my boss, was vibrating with anxiety. He looked like he had been electrocuted. Julia, he said, cornering me by the coffee machine. I need you on this. I mean, really on this. Sarah is great with the balloons and the centerpieces. But this is contracts. This is liability waivers. This is managing a budget of $500,000. I need a brain. I will handle it. I said, and I did. I threw myself into the Archer Bay account with the ferocity of someone running away from a burning building. I arrived at 7 in the morning. I left at 9 at night. I turned my personal tragedy into professional fuel. I organized the vendor contracts into a color-coded master file. I renegotiated the catering quote. saving the client 12%. I flagged a clause in the venue agreement that would have left us liable for security costs and got it struck. The more complex the problem, the calmer I became. The chaos of the event was manageable. The chaos of my life was not. So I lived in the event. 2 weeks into the project, we had a site visit with the client's legal and operations team. We met in the boardroom of the luxury hotel where the gala would be held. The Archer Bay team was slick, corporate, and intimidating. They wore suits that cost more than my car. I sat next to David, my laptop open, my binder of spreadsheets ready. Across the table sat a man who looked different from the others. He wasn't wearing a tie. He had dark hair that was slightly messy, and he was wearing a charcoal gray sweater over a button-down shirt. He was reading a file, his eyes moving rapidly back and forth. "This is Eli Mercer," the head of operations introduced him, in-house counsel for Archer Bay. "He will be reviewing all vendor compliance." Eli looked up. His eyes were dark and intelligent. He didn't smile, but he nodded. "Let us start with the security vendor," Eli said. His voice was quiet, baritone, and precise. I noticed a discrepancy in the insurance minimums. David started to sweat. He looked at me. I opened my binder. Tab 4. "The contract states a $2 million aggregate," I said, my voice steady. "But the venue requires $3 million. I already flagged this with the vendor, and they issued a rider yesterday increasing the coverage. Here is the updated certificate." I slid the paper across the polished mahogany table. Eli picked it up. He studied it. He studied me. Fast. He said, "Good." The meeting lasted 3 hours. Every time Eli asked a question, about permits, about liquor liability, about fire codes, I had the answer. I anticipated his questions before he asked them. It was like a game of tennis, and I was volleying everything he sent over the net. By the end of the meeting, David looked like he wanted to hug me, and the Archer Bay team looked impressed. Eli packed up his files. He lingered while the others filed out. "You are not an event planner," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am the operations manager," I said, packing my laptop. "No," he said. "You read contracts like a lawyer, and you manage risk like an actuary. What is your background?" "MBA." I said, "Analyst. Why are you coordinating flower arrangements?" I looked at him. He wasn't mocking me. He was genuinely curious. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away. But his eyes were sharp. I needed a change of scenery. I said. He nodded, accepting the non-answer. "Well, you are the only person on your team who seems to understand that a contract is a binding instrument." "Not a suggestion," he said. I laughed. A short, dry sound. "You have no idea," I said. He paused. He looked at me more closely. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "You tightened up when I said binding instrument." I hesitated. I didn't know this man. He was a client, but there was something about his objectivity, his calm, analytical presence that made me want to tell him, "I am dealing with a personal legal matter," I said, "regarding a signature." "Identity theft?" he asked immediately. "Familial fraud," I corrected. Eli flinched. "Just a micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw. The worst kind." He said, "Messy, emotional. I found out they took out a loan in my name." I said, "And a credit card." I froze everything. "But they are claiming it was proxy signing." Eli set his briefcase down on the table. He leaned forward. "Listen to me," he said. His voice dropped, becoming professional and urgent. "Do not rely on phone calls. Do not rely on apologies. Do not rely on guilt. If they forged your signature, it is a crime. But the law is bad at handling families. The police will tell you it is a civil matter. The banks will tell you to file a police report. It is a loop. So what do? You build a wall of paper," Eli said. "Get the notary logs." "The what?" "The loan," he said. "If it was for $15,000, it had to be notarized. A home improvement loan usually requires a witness for the promissory note. Find out who notarized it. If you were not there, the notary broke the law too. That is your leverage." I stared at him. I hadn't thought of the notary. And stop talking to them, Eli added. Every time you talk to them, you give them information they can use to build their defense. You need a timeline. You need hard data. Emotions are evidentiary noise. Ignore them. He picked up his briefcase. Thank you, I said. He nodded. Good job today. Julia, keep your head down. He walked out. I stood there for a moment, absorbing his advice. Emotions are evidentiary noise. It was cold, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. I had been trying to get my parents to admit they were wrong. I had been trying to get closure, but I didn't need closure. I needed leverage. I went back to the office and worked until my eyes blurred. I felt stronger. I had a plan. I would find the notary. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message. I looked at the sender. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't Leo. It was Paige, my younger sister. Paige was 26, the baby of the family. She was soft-hearted, flighty, and usually oblivious to the family dynamics because my parents spoiled her while relying on me. I hadn't heard from her since the graduation. I opened the message. Paige, Jules, are you okay? Mom and Dad are saying you had a mental breakdown. They said you canceled graduation because you were having panic attacks and that you ran away to a cult or something. I'm scared. Please just text me back. I stared at the screen. A mental breakdown. Ran away to a cult. The lies were not just layered. They were architectural. They were building a fortress of insanity around me to discredit anything I might say about the money. If I accused them of fraud, they would just point to my breakdown and say I was delusional. They told Paige I canceled. They told her it was my fault. I felt a surge of protectiveness over my sister. She was innocent in this. She was just another prop in their play. I typed back, my fingers flying. Me. I am not in a cult. I am safe. I am working. They are lying to you. Paige, they skipped graduation to go to the Whitlock's party, and they stole money from me. Do not believe them. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Paige, they said you would say that. They said you're paranoid. I closed my eyes. They had inoculated her against the truth. They had gotten to her first. Me. I have proof. Just be careful. Paige, don't sign anything they give you. I set the phone down. I was alone in the empty office. The hum of the server room was the only sound. I looked at the folder on my desk labeled Archer Bay. I looked at the folder on my laptop labeled Evidence. My parents were building a story where I was the villain, but I was building a case, and thanks to Eli, I knew exactly where to look next. The notary. I opened a new tab on my browser. Search. Notary. Public regulations, plus fraud, plus liability. I hit enter. The game was changing. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was hunting. The glowing screen of my phone was the only light in the room as I read Paige's messages. It was 2 a.m. in Harbor Point, but the time difference meant my sister was just waking up, or perhaps she had not slept at all. Her texts came in a rapid, disjointed stream, like a dam breaking. I didn't want to tell you, she wrote, but it is not just the graduation. It is everything. Mom and Dad have been obsessed with the Whitlocks for years. Do you remember when they bought that boat they never used? It was because the Whitlocks got a slip at the marina. They sold it at a loss 6 months later. I sat up in bed, propping the pillows behind me. I typed back, the loan. I wrote, did they say what the money was specifically for? Paige was typing for a long time. Then the bubble disappeared. Then it reappeared. They owe the Whitlocks money, she replied. Dad lost a bet? Or maybe it was an investment in one of Mr. Whitlock's commercial properties that went bad. I don't know the details. But I heard Dad on the phone saying he needed liquid capital to buy his way out of a misunderstanding. They used the party to smooth things over, to look like they were still players. I stared at the wall. It was worse than I thought. They hadn't just stolen my identity to pay bills. They had stolen it to pay for the privilege of remaining in a social circle that was actively drowning them. They were buying tickets to a sinking ship using my credit score. I am coming back. I typed, just for a day. Do not tell them. I needed to go back. Not for closure, and certainly not for a reunion. I needed to go back because in the chaos of my departure, I had left behind the one thing that might protect me. Years ago, my grandfather Arthur, my mother's father, a man who loathed debt and viewed my parents' lifestyle with quiet disdain, had given me a key. It was a small, flat brass key to a safe deposit box at a local community bank. "Keep this," he had told me on his deathbed, his grip surprisingly strong. "Your mother has no sense. Your father has too much pride. If things get bad, you open the box. Just you." I had put the key on my ring and forgotten about it. I had assumed it contained old war medals, or maybe a deed to a plot of land in the middle of nowhere. But now, with Eli's voice in my head telling me to build a wall of paper, I remembered the way my grandfather had looked at me. He had known. He had seen the trajectory of my parents' greed long before I did. I booked a flight for the next morning. The flight back to my hometown felt like traveling backward in time. The air in the cabin was stale. I kept my head down, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf, terrified that someone I knew might be on the plane. I rented a generic compact car at the airport. Driving through the familiar streets was a surreal experience. I passed the high school I had attended, the strip mall where I had my first job, the park where I used to read to escape the house. It all looked smaller, grayer, as if the color had been drained out of it. I went straight to the bank. It was an old brick building with high ceilings and the smell of dust and money. I presented the key and my ID to the clerk. She checked her computer. "Julia Stewart," she said. "You are a co-signer on the box with Arthur Miller. Let me get the master key." She led me into the vault. It was a heavy, silent room lined with hundreds of metal drawers. She unlocked box 402, slid the long metal tray out, and placed it on a table in a private viewing room. "I will give you some privacy," she said, closing the door. I stared at the metal box. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to breathe. I opened the lid. Inside, there was a single, thick manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, an old-fashioned touch that made my throat tight. On the front, in my grandfather's spidery handwriting, it said, "For Julia, not to be opened until she is ready to walk away." He knew. He had always known. I broke the seal. Inside were two things. The first was a cashier's check. I looked at the amount. $50,000. It was not a fortune. It was not enough to retire on. But to a woman who had just had her credit destroyed and her savings depleted, it was a miracle. It was freedom. The second thing was a letter. "My dear Julia, if you are reading this, you have finally realized that your parents are holes in the bucket. No matter how much you pour in, they will never be full. I watched them spend your college fund on a renovation. I watched them lease cars they could not afford to impress people they do not like. I cannot change them, but I can give you a parachute. This money is in a trust I set up under your name alone. They do not know it exists. If they did, they would have found a way to guilt you out of it. Use this to start fresh. Do not look back. You do not owe them your future just because they gave you a past. Love, Grandpa." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. My parents had always acted nervous whenever grandfather's estate was mentioned. They had told me he left everything to charity. They had lied. They had been terrified that I would find this money and leave them. They needed me to be poor, or at least dependent, so they could control me. I put the check and the letter in my purse. I felt a steel rod straighten in my spine. I was not a victim anymore. I was funded. I drove to my parents' house. I had texted Paige from the parking lot. "I am here. Are they home?" "Yes," she had replied. "They are in the den watching TV." I unlocked the back door. "Hurry." I parked down the street, behind a neighbor's hedges. I walked to the house, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel. The house looked the same, imposing, manicured, a monument to upper-middle-class stability. But now I saw the cracks, the paint peeling on the window frames, the overgrown weeds choking the expensive rose bushes. I slipped in through the back door. The kitchen smelled of coffee and denial. Paige was waiting for me in the hallway. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with red. She hugged me, a fierce, desperate embrace. "They are in the den," she whispered. "They are talking about the Whitlocks." I nodded. I pulled away and walked toward the living room. I passed the hallway console table, the one where my mother displayed the family photos. The shrine to their success. I stopped. There was a new frame, a silver, ornate thing that looked expensive. Inside was a photo of me. I was wearing a graduation cap and gown. I was smiling, holding a diploma, but it wasn't me. I leaned closer. The girl in the photo had my hair color. She had my general build, but her nose was slightly different. Her chin was sharper, and the sash over her gown was purple. My university colors were gold and maroon. I stared at the photo, my brain short-circuiting. It was a stock photo, or maybe a photo of a stranger they had found online. They had printed it out, framed it, and placed it on the table as if it were proof of the graduation they had skipped. It was a prop. To them, I was a prop. The reality of my graduation, the empty seat, the pain, the solitude, did not matter. They just needed the image of a successful daughter to display to guests. The sheer, psychotic audacity of it took my breath away. They were not just lying to others. They were curating a false reality within their own home. I grabbed the frame. I walked into the den. My father was in his recliner, a glass of scotch in his hand. My mother was on the sofa. Flipping through a magazine, the TV was blaring a news program. They looked up as I entered. My father choked on his drink. My mother dropped the magazine. "Julia?" she gasped. I did not say hello. I did not ask how they were. I threw the frame onto the coffee table. The glass shattered with a loud, satisfying crash. "Who is that?" I asked. My voice was deadly calm. My mother stared at the broken glass. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and terrified. It is a placeholder," she stammered. "We were waiting for your official portraits. We just wanted something on the table for when the neighbors came over. A placeholder," I repeated. "Like a stunt double?" My father stood up. His face was flushing a dark, angry red. "You break into my house and start smashing things?" he shouted. "Have you lost your mind?" I ignored him. I reached into my bag and pulled out the file, the folder labeled Evidence. I tossed the papers onto the coffee table. Right on top of the shattered glass, the collection notice from Mid-State Financial, the credit report showing the inquiries, the transaction log for the Super Bowl party, the copy of the forged promissory note. "I know," I said. The room went silent. The only sound was the low murmur of the TV. My father looked at the papers. He did not pick them up. He knew what they were. "You know what?" he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You know that we are struggling? Is that what you came here to gloat about?" "I came here to ask you one question." I said, "Did you sign my name?" My mother burst into tears. It was a theatrical, wailing sound that I had heard 1,000 times before. It was her defense mechanism. If she cried loud enough, she became the victim. "We did it for us," she sobbed. "We are a family. Julia, what is yours is ours. We were going to pay it back. Did you sign my name?" I repeated. My father stepped around the table. He loomed over me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "I authorized the signature," he said. "As the head of this household, I made an executive decision to leverage our assets to save our standing. You were not here. You were off playing student in your little apartment. I did what had to be done. You committed fraud." I said, "You stole $15,000 from a lender, and you stole $4,000 from a credit card company. And you did it to throw a party for people who treat you like a joke. Don't you dare talk about the Whitlocks like that," my father yelled. "They are our friends. They are helping us. They are using you." I said, "And you used me. I am freezing my credit." I continued, "I am disputing the debt. I am filing an affidavit of forgery." My father's face went pale. The anger drained away, replaced by a sudden, sharp fear. "You can't," he said. "If you do that, the lender will come after us. It will be a criminal investigation." "I know," I said. "You would send your own father to jail?" he asked. "Over money?" "Not over money," I said. "Over the lie. Over the fact that you looked me in the eye on my graduation day, knowing you had already sold me out. and told me I was being dramatic. My mother looked up from the sofa, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Julia, please," she begged. "We can fix this. We can work out a payment plan. Just do not report it. Think of the scandal. Think of Paige." I looked at Paige, who was standing in the doorway, silent and pale. "Paige knows," I said, "and she knows not to sign anything you give her." I turned to leave. "You walk out that door," my father shouted, "and you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You are ungrateful, selfish trash. We made you." I stopped at the door. I looked back at them. The shattered glass, the spilled scotch, the fake photo. "You didn't make me," I said. "You just leased me. And the lease is up." I walked out. I got into my rental car. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't put the key in the ignition. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, waiting for the adrenaline to subside. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. I expected it to be my father, or maybe my mother calling to plead again. It was an unknown number, local area code. I answered it. "Hello? Julia Stewart?" "Yes, this is Evelyn Whitlock." I froze. The queen bee herself. I had met her maybe 3 times in my life. She always looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. "Mrs. Whitlock," I said, "I am calling because your father just called my husband." She said, her voice was crisp, cold, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "He is in quite a state. He is claiming that you have defrauded him. He claims you took out a loan to pay off a debt he owed us, and now you are refusing to honor it and trying to pin it on him." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He told you I defrauded him?" I asked. He was very loud. She said, and very desperate. "Look, Julia, I do not care about your family drama, but your father owes my husband a significant amount of money for a failed commercial venture. We were kind enough to let him work it out. But if he is dragging our name into a fraud investigation, or if the police are going to be asking us questions about where his money came from, we are going to distance ourselves. Immediately." He forged my signature. "Mrs. Whitlock," I said. "He took the loan to pay you." "I assumed as much," she said dryly. "Your father is not exactly a mastermind. But listen to me. He is blaming you. He is telling everyone in the club that you are unstable and a thief. If your name is tied to this financial mess, you should get ahead of it, because when the ship goes down, he is going to try to stand on your shoulders to keep his head above water." She paused. "He is a drowning man. Julia, do not let him pull you under." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The irony was suffocating. My parents had destroyed their relationship with me to impress the Whitlocks, and now the Whitlocks were calling me to warn me that my parents were trying to frame me. The social circle they had worshipped was not just indifferent. They were disgusted. My parents were not connected. They were the entertainment. And now, they were a liability. I started the car. I did not go back to the house. I did not go to the police station. Not yet. I drove to the airport. I sat at the gate, typing a letter on my phone, to Robert and Linda Stewart. Effective immediately. I will not accept phone calls or text messages from you. All communication must be in writing. I have disputed the debt with Mid-State Financial and the credit bureaus. I have provided them with the timeline of events. If they contact you, that is between you and them. Do not contact my employer. Do not contact my friends. Do not post about me on social media. If you attempt to use my identity again, I will press charges. Julia." I hit send. Then I blocked them again. I flew back to Harbor Point in a daze. The check in my purse felt heavy, like a loaded weapon. When I landed, the rain had stopped. The air was clear and cold. I went straight to Mara's house. She was waiting up for me, a pot of tea on the stove. She looked at my face and didn't ask how it went. She knew. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked. I pulled the check out of my bag. I placed it on the table. "Grandpa left me a way out," I said. Mara smiled. "Good man." She said, "The next day, I called Eli at Archer Bay. I need a lawyer." I said, "Not for the event. For me, I know a guy." Eli said, He is not cheap, but he is a shark. He eats fraudsters for breakfast. I have money. I said, I met the lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, in a glass-walled office overlooking the bay. He was 60, bald, and wore a suit that looked like it was cut from steel wool. He listened to my story without interrupting. He looked at the copies of the loan, the fake signature, the affidavit I had drafted. He looked at the letter from the Whitlocks, or rather, the notes I had taken from the call. You have them, Marcus said. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a gold pen against the desk. The notary is the weak link. We pressure the lender to produce the notary log. The notary will flip on your parents to save their own license. Once we establish you were not in the room, the loan is void as to you. And my parents? I asked. The lender will go after them, Marcus said, aggressively. They committed wire fraud and forgery. Do it, I said. Marcus looked at me. This will get ugly. Julia, they will scream. They will lie. They will try to destroy your reputation. They already have. I said, they told the town I was crazy. They told the Whitlocks I was a thief. I am done protecting them. Marcus nodded. Then let us file. He drafted the dispute package. It was 20 pages of cold, hard facts. We sent it via certified mail to Mid-State Financial, the credit bureaus, and, as a courtesy copy, to my parents. I walked out of his office into the Harbor Point sunlight. I felt lighter than I had in years. I had lost my family. I had lost the illusion of being loved, but I had my name back, and for the first time, I was going to define what it meant. The week leading up to the Archer Bay Athletics Championship Gala was not measured in hours or minutes, but in heartbeats. Every second was a crisis waiting to detonate. The venue, a sprawling glass and steel resort overlooking the harbor, was buzzing with an army of florists, lighting technicians, and security personnel. My boss, David, had effectively ceased to function as a rational human being. He vibrated with anxiety, snapping at interns and pacing the loading dock like a captain watching his ship take on water. Julia, he said, clutching my arm on Tuesday morning. The keynote speaker has changed his dietary requirements again. The donor bags are stuck in transit, and I think the fire marshal hates me. I gently removed his hand from my arm. I handled the speaker's meal with the chef an hour ago. I said, my voice calm. The donor bags are not stuck. The driver was just taking a lunch break. And I have his GPS location, and the fire marshal does not hate you. David, he just wants the exits clear. I walk the floor with him myself. We are green across the board. David exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He looked at me with something bordering on religious adoration. I do not know what I would do without you, he said. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. This is unauthorized, he said, lowering his voice. But corporate approved the headcount. If we pull this weekend off, if we land the renewal contract with Archer Bay, this is yours. I took the envelope. Inside was a draft offer letter. Position: Director of Operations. Salary: a number that made my breath catch. A number that meant I could buy a house. I could pay cash for a car. I could disappear so thoroughly that my past would need a telescope to find me. It is contingent on the weekend. David warned, if we crash and burn, the budget for the role disappears. But if we win, you are in, I am in, I said, tucking the letter into my blazer pocket. We will not crash. I walked away feeling invincible. I was competent. I was valued. I was building a life that had nothing to do with the Stewart family drama, but the universe has a cruel sense of timing. That evening, I returned to Mara's house late, my feet throbbing from 12 hours in heels. I saw a car parked in the driveway that did not belong there. It was a nondescript gray sedan. A man was standing on the porch, talking to Mara through the screen door. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a cheap windbreaker and holding a clipboard. I walked up the path, my senses on high alert. Can I help you? I asked. The man turned. He looked at me, then down at a photo clipped to his paperwork. Julia Stewart? He asked. Yes. He thrust a stack of papers toward me. "You have been served," he said. I took the papers automatically. They were heavy. Mara opened the door, her face pale. "He said he was a delivery driver," she said, her voice tight with anger. I opened the door before I realized. "It is okay." "Mara," I said, though my stomach had turned to ice. The man walked past me, got into his gray sedan, and drove away. I looked down at the documents. Superior Court of the State. Plaintiff. Mid-State Financial Services. Defendant. Julia Marie Stewart. Action. Breach of contract/fraud. They were suing me. Not just sending letters. Not just calling. They had filed a formal lawsuit. They were seeking the full $15,000, plus legal fees, plus interest. I went into the kitchen and laid the papers on the table. The legal language was aggressive. They were accusing me of unjust enrichment and willful default. My parents had done this. They had backed me into a corner where I either had to pay a debt I did not owe or fight a war I did not start. I called Marcus Thorne immediately. He answered on the first ring. "I got served." I said, "Good," Marcus said. His voice was gravelly and unbothered. "Good?" I asked. "How is that good?" "Because now we are in discovery," Marcus said. "Before, they could ignore our requests for information. Now, they have to produce everything or the judge will sanction them. Bring the papers to my office in the morning." I went to his office at 7 in the morning. Before I had to be at the venue, Marcus flipped through the complaint, making small grunting noises. "Standard intimidation," he said. "They want a default judgment. They think you will be too scared to show up." He pulled a file from his desk. "While you were getting served, my investigator found something," he said. He laid a photo on the desk. It was a grainy picture of a storefront in a strip mall back in my hometown. The sign said, "Pack ship, mailboxes, notary, passports." "I know that place," I said. "It is on Elm Street. My parents go there all the time to return packages." "Exactly," Marcus said. "The notary stamp on the promissory note belongs to a woman named Janice Miller. She works at that shop. She has been a notary for 10 years. "Janice," I said. "I remember her. She is chatty. My mother always brings her Christmas cookies." Marcus leaned forward. "Here is the thing about notaries, Julia. They are required by law to keep a logbook. Every time they stamp a document, they have to record the date, the type of document, the name of the signer, and, this is the key, how they identified the signer, driver's license, passport, or personal knowledge. If Janice is a friend," I said, feeling sick, "maybe she just stamped it without looking. That is what we are banking on," Marcus said. "If she stamped it without you being there, she lost her immunity, she is liable, and she will not go to jail for your parents." He slid a letter across the desk. "We are sending this today. It is a demand for the production of the notary logbook, the security footage from the shop on the date of signing, and the original wet ink documents. We are also noticing Janice Miller for a deposition." He looked at me. "We are going to shake the tree, Julia. And we are going to see what falls out." I went to the Archer Bay venue feeling like I was split in two. One half of me was the calm, commanding director of operations, directing union crews and checking lighting rigs. The other half was a frightened daughter waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed eyes on the inside. I needed to know what was happening in that house before Marcus's letter landed like a bomb. I went to the loading dock, where the noise of trucks backing up would mask my voice. And I texted Paige. "Can you talk? Safe?" She called me 2 minutes later. "They are gone." She whispered, "They went to lunch at the club. They are acting like nothing is wrong. Julia, it is creepy. Dad is talking about buying a new grill." "Paige, listen to me." I said, "I need you to do something dangerous." Silence on the line. Then, "What?" "I need you to go into the office." I said, "Look in the filing cabinet, the bottom drawer. Dad keeps a file marked taxes, or sometimes miscellaneous. I need you to look for anything with my name on it, or any practice papers." "Practice papers?" "Just look." I said, "Please." I hung up and went back to work. I spent the next 4 hours coordinating the arrival of 300 gift bags containing high-end noise-canceling headphones. I argued with a caterer who wanted to serve peanuts in a nut-free zone. I felt like I was holding back the tide with a teaspoon. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a series of photos from Paige. The first photo was of a file folder. The second photo was of a photocopy of my old driver's license, the one I had discarded 3 years ago when I moved apartments. They had fished it out of the trash or kept a copy I didn't know about. The third photo made me stop breathing. It was a sheet of printer paper. All over it, in blue ink, were attempts at a signature. Julia Stewart, Julia M. Stewart, Julia Stewart. Some were crossed out. Some were circled. The handwriting started out stiff, clearly my mother's looping script, and then slowly, line by line, it morphed. It became sharper. The loops tightened. The slope changed. By the bottom of the page, it was terrifyingly close to my real signature. My mother had sat at her desk, perhaps with a glass of wine, and practiced becoming me. She had rehearsed the crime. It wasn't a moment of panic at the bank. It was premeditated identity theft, refined over an afternoon. I stared at the image, standing in the middle of a ballroom that smelled of expensive lilies. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grab the back of a chair to stay upright. This was not love. This was not family. This was a violation so deep it felt physical. I forwarded the images to Marcus. From Paige. I typed, "Found in their home office today." Marcus replied instantly, "Got it. This is the smoking gun. Stay focused on work. We have them." But there was more. Later that afternoon, Marcus called me. I stepped into a supply closet to answer. "We got the loan disbursement details from the bank." He said, "Where did the money go?" I asked. "It went directly to an account held by Whitlock Ventures LLC. Marcus said, I leaned my head against the shelving unit, closing my eyes. The Whitlocks. I said, "Your parents guaranteed a business loan for them." Marcus explained, "It looks like the Whitlocks were trying to launch a boutique real estate fund last year. It tanked. Your parents were on the hook as guarantors. They didn't have the cash to cover the call, so they took out a loan in your name to pay the Whitlocks and keep their standing in the social circle." It all clicked. The desperation, the party, Mrs. Whitlock's cold phone call. My parents had set themselves on fire to keep the Whitlocks warm, and when they ran out of fuel, they threw me into the flames. They guaranteed a debt they couldn't afford. I whispered, "To impress people who don't care about them." "It is a tragedy," Marcus said, his voice void of sentiment. "But legally, it is a slam dunk. They used the proceeds of fraud to pay a third party. We can trace every penny. Focus on the weekend. Julia," he added, "let me be the shark. You just be the star." Friday arrived, the start of the Archer Bay Championship weekend. The resort was transformed. Banners in Archer Bay, gold and black, hung from the ceiling. Athletes who made millions of dollars a year roamed the lobby. The air crackled with money and power. I was in the control room, wearing a headset, watching a wall of monitors. "Cue the lights." I said into the mic, "Cue music. Doors open in 3, 2, 1. The doors swung open. The guests flooded in. For the next 48 hours, I did not sleep. I existed on adrenaline and protein bars. There were crises, of course. A VIP donor got stuck in the elevator. I had maintenance override the system in 4 minutes. The band's rider was missing a specific type of whiskey. I sent a runner to 3 liquor stores until we found it. A sudden rainstorm threatened the outdoor cocktail hour. I triggered the tent contingency plan I had designed weeks ago, and the transition was so smooth the guests thought it was part of the show. I moved through the venue like a ghost, fixing things before they broke. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The chaos of my family had inoculated me against stress. Compared to finding out your mother practiced forging your signature, a missing microphone stand was a joke. Eli Mercer found me on Saturday night, during the height of the gala dinner. I was standing in the wings of the stage, checking the run of show on my tablet. He was wearing a tuxedo. He looked tired but sharp. "You are frighteningly good at this," he said, leaning against the wall next to me. I checked a timestamp. "We are 2 minutes ahead of schedule," I said. "The speeches are running short." I need to tell the kitchen to slow down the dessert service. Eli laughed softly. Julia, stop, he said. Look at the room. I looked out at the ballroom. 500 people were laughing, eating, raising glasses. It was flawless. You did this, he said. David is hyperventilating in the hallway. But you? You are running the show. It is just logistics. I said. No, Eli said. It is grace under fire. I spoke to the CEO earlier. He wants to know if you have signed the offer letter yet. I touched the pocket of my blazer, where the letter still sat. Not yet. I said. Do it, Eli said. You belong here. You are one of us now. One of us. People who did the work. People who valued competence over appearance. I signed it the next morning. Sitting in the empty ballroom as the cleaning crew swept up the confetti, I was officially the director of operations for Cedar and Coast. With a dedicated contract for Archer Bay, I had made it. I walked out of the venue into the bright Sunday sunlight. I turned my phone off, Do Not Disturb, for the first time in 2 days. The notifications flooded in. One voicemail. From my father. I sat on a concrete bench overlooking the harbor. I pressed play. Julia. His voice was low, shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. We got a letter from a lawyer, Marcus Thorne. He is demanding logs. He is noticing Janice for a deposition. A pause. I heard him breathing heavily. You need to call this off. Right now. Janice is a friend. If you drag her into this, she loses her license. She loses her shop. Do you understand what you're doing? You are destroying people's lives over a misunderstanding. His voice rose, cracking. If you don't fix this, you will destroy us. The Whitlocks will know. The club will know. We will be pariahs. Is that what you want? To humiliate your own flesh and blood? Call the lawyer. Tell him it was a mistake. Fix it. Julia, fix it. Not, I am sorry. Not, we messed up. Not, how can we make this right? Fix it. Cover for us. Lie for us. Absorb the blow for us. I looked at the water. The bay was calm, the waves lapping gently against the rocks. I deleted the voicemail. My email pinged. It was from Marcus. Subject. Notary. Log received. I opened it. Julia. We scared the shop owner. He sent over the pages from the logbook immediately to avoid a subpoena. See attached. I opened the attachment. It was a scan of a handwritten ledger. Line 402. Date. January 12th. Document. Promissory note. Name. Julia Stewart. ID. Type. Personal knowledge. But there was a column for notes/description that Janice, in her diligence, or perhaps her habit of noting details about customers, had filled out. It read, Julia, Linda's daughter, height 5'4", eyes, brown, hair, blonde. I froze. I am 5'9", my eyes are green, my hair is dark brown, my mother is 5'4". She has brown eyes. She dyes her hair blonde. Janice hadn't just stamped it blindly. My mother had gone in there, likely chatting about me, likely creating a confusing narrative, and stood there while Janice stamped the document. Janice, who had known me as a child but hadn't seen me in 10 years, had looked at my mother, who shares my facial structure, and accepted her presence as mine. Or perhaps my mother had claimed I was waiting in the car and she was signing for me, but the description in the log proved, objectively and irrefutably, that I was not the person standing at that counter. I was not there. The physical description was the crack in the dam. It was the detail that turned a he said, she said family dispute into verifiable criminal fraud. My mother had impersonated me, and because she was vain, or because Janice was observant, her own physical description was now the evidence that would convict her. I felt a profound sadness settle over me. It was not the sharp pain of betrayal anymore. It was the dull ache of realizing that my parents were not powerful monsters. They were sloppy, desperate, small people who had made a series of terrible choices. But small people can cause big damage. I replied to Marcus, Look at the description. I am 5'9" with green eyes. That is my mother. Marcus replied, That is the checkmate. I am drafting the affidavit now. We will file for summary judgment on the fraud claim. The lender will have to discharge the debt against you and pursue your parents. Are you ready for that? I looked at the water again. I thought about the job offer in my purse. I thought about the practice sheets in the filing cabinet. I thought about the Super Bowl party. I was not destroying them. They had destroyed themselves the moment they decided I was a resource instead of a daughter. I typed back, "File it." The conference room was located on the 14th floor of a building that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a neutral ground, a sterile space with gray carpeting and a long mahogany table that shone under the fluorescent lights. I sat on one side, flanked by Marcus Thorne, who had flown in that morning, looking like a sleek, dangerous weapon in his charcoal suit. Across the table sat my parents. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father, usually so boisterous and commandingly large in his own living room, looked deflated. His skin had a gray, pasty quality, and he refused to make eye contact with me. He kept adjusting his cuffs, a nervous tic I had not seen since the recession of 2008. My mother sat next to him, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a shield. She was wearing a pale blue suit, the kind she usually wore to charity luncheons. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, but her eyes were darting around the room, settling on everything except my face. Next to them sat their attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson, who looked tired and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. He was a local guy, someone my father probably knew from the golf club, and he looked like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. At the head of the table sat the mediator, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense bun, and to her right sat the representative from Mid-State Financial, a man named Mr. Vance. He was young, ambitious, and clearly annoyed that he had to be there. Paige was sitting in a chair against the wall, behind our parents. She looked terrified. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hands twisted together in her lap. When our eyes met, she gave me a tiny, trembling nod. "We are here to discuss the matter of Stewart versus Mid-State Financial," the mediator said, opening a file, "and the counterclaim regarding the debt obligation of $15,000. Mr. Vance cleared his throat. He opened his own folder, looking bored. "Let us be clear," he said, his voice crisp. "Mid-State Financial holds a valid promissory note signed by Julia Stewart. The funds were dispersed. The payments were not made. This is a straightforward breach of contract. We are prepared to move forward with wage garnishment unless a settlement is reached today. We believe the fraud claim is a delay tactic." He looked at me with a smirk. He thought I was just another deadbeat trying to wiggle out of a bill. Marcus leaned forward. He did not smile. He did not open a folder. He just rested his hands on the table, calm and predatory. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice low and gravelly, "you are operating under a significant misconception. You do not have a valid promissory note. You have a piece of evidence in a criminal conspiracy." "Mr. Vance rolled his eyes. "We have a notarized signature," he said. "That is the gold standard." "Mr. Thorne, unless you are suggesting the notary is lying, we are not suggesting it," Marcus said. "We are proving it." Marcus reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the scan of the notary logbook. He slid it across the table. "This is the logbook from the pack and ship on Elm Street," Marcus said, "dated January 12th, line 402. Mr. Vance picked it up. My parents stiffened. My mother's knuckles were white on her purse strap. "It says Julia Stewart," Mr. Vance said, shrugging, "identified by personal knowledge. That confirms our position. Read the notes." Marcus said, "Mr. Vance looked down. He squinted. Julia, Linda's daughter, height 5'4", eyes brown, hair blonde. Mr. Vance stopped reading. He looked up at me. I sat perfectly still. I stared right at him. "I am 5 feet 9 inches tall," I said clearly. "My eyes are green, and as you can see, my hair is dark brown." The room went silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Mr. Vance looked back at the paper. Then he looked at my mother. "My mother is 5'4". I continued. She has brown eyes, and she dyes her hair blonde. Mr. Henderson, my parents' lawyer, closed his eyes briefly. He knew, in that moment, he knew he was defending a lie. Mr. Vance turned to my parents. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating anger. Is this true? He asked. Mrs. Stewart, were you the one standing at that counter? My mother let out a small, strangled sound. It was a misunderstanding, she blurted out. Janice knows me. She knows us. I might have implied that Julia was in the car, or that she had signed it earlier. It was just a formality. We were in a rush. A formality, Marcus repeated, his voice slicing through the air like a razor. It is not a formality. Mrs. Stewart, it is forgery. You impersonated your daughter to a notary public. That is a felony. And Mr. Vance, since your organization accepted a document that was patently false based on a cursory visual check, you have a liability problem. Mr. Vance dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers. Then Marcus pulled out the second piece of evidence. We subpoenaed the security footage from the shipping store. He said, they keep backups for 6 months. He placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. The video was grainy, but clear enough. It showed the counter of the pack and ship. It showed Janice, the notary, standing behind the register, and it showed my mother walking in. She was wearing a large coat and sunglasses. She walked up to the counter. She pulled a paper out of her bag. She signed it right there, on the glass counter. Janice stamped it. They laughed. My mother handed Janice a tin of cookies. I was nowhere in the frame. Marcus paused the video on the freeze frame of my mother signing my name. That is not Julia Stewart, Marcus said. That is Linda Stewart, committing wire fraud. My father slammed his hand on the table. The sound made everyone jump. Enough, he shouted. He stood up, his face red and twisted with fury. But he wasn't looking at the lawyer. He was looking at me. Are you happy now? He yelled. Are you satisfied? You drag us into this room. You humiliate your mother. You treat us like criminals over a few $1,000s. It is not about the money, Dad, I said. It is always about money, he roared. You are doing this out of spite. You are doing this because we went to a party. You are punishing us because you are jealous that we have a life. You are a petty, ungrateful child. He was projecting so hard it was almost tragic. He could not accept that he had done anything wrong. In his mind, he was the victim of an ungrateful daughter who refused to play her role as the family bank. Sit down, Robert. Mr. Henderson hissed, tugging on my father's sleeve. You are not helping. I am not sitting down, my father yelled. This is ridiculous. It was a family loan. We intended to pay it back. And then, a voice spoke up from the back of the room. Small, shaking, but clear. You didn't intend to pay it back. We all turned. Paige stood up. Her legs were trembling, but her chin was high. She was holding a manila envelope. Paige? My mother whispered. What are you doing? You told me Julia was crazy, Paige said, stepping forward. You told me she was making it all up. You told me she canceled graduation. She walked to the table. She didn't look at our parents. She looked at the mediator. I found these in the home office, she said, in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, under taxes. She dumped the contents of the envelope onto the mahogany table. The photocopies of my old ID slid across the polished wood. The sheets of printer paper covered in practice signatures fanned out. Julia Stewart, Julia Stewart, Julia Stewart. The evidence of premeditation lay there for everyone to see. It wasn't a rush job. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a rehearsal. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. She reached out to cover the papers, to hide them, but it was too late. You practiced, Paige said, her voice breaking. You sat there and practiced becoming her. That is not a mistake, Mom. That is stealing. My father stared at Paige. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. He had lost control of both his daughters in the span of a week. Mr. Vance looked at the practice sheets. He looked at the video still. He looked at the notary log. He closed his folder with a sharp snap. "We are done here," he said. He turned to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, Midstate Financial is officially withdrawing the complaint against your client, Julia Stewart. We will be conducting an internal investigation into the notary's conduct. We will also be filing a new complaint against Robert and Linda Stewart for fraud, forgery, and theft of services." He stood up. "My client is cleared?" Marcus asked. "Completely. Mr. Vance said, "We will send the release of liability letter by the end of the business day. We will also contact the credit bureaus to remove the trade line from her report." He looked at my parents with pure disgust. "You two should get a criminal defense attorney," he said. "You are going to need one." Mr. Vance walked out. The room felt suddenly large and empty. The mediator looked at my parents with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "I think we are finished," she said. My father sank back into his chair. He looked old. The fight had drained out of him, leaving only a desperate, hollow panic. He looked at me. His eyes were pleading now. "Julia," he said. "Wait." I stood up. I began gathering my things. "We can fix this," he said. His voice was a whisper. "There is nothing to fix." "Dad," I said, "it is over." "No, listen," he said, leaning across the table. "I have some money coming in from an investment. I can pay you back. I can give you the 15,000 plus interest. I will give you 20,000. I stopped. I looked at him. He was trying to bribe me. After everything. After the lies, the forgery, the humiliation, the lawsuit, he thought he could just write a check and make it go away. "I will give you $20,000. He repeated, gaining a little steam. "Right now. I just need you to sign something. A private agreement. Just a paper saying this was a misunderstanding, that you authorized it retroactively. We can show it to the lender. We can stop the criminal charges." He wasn't offering restitution. He was buying an alibi. I looked at my mother. She was watching me with hopeful, wet eyes. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "Just sign the paper. We can be a family again. We can put this behind us." I looked at Paige. She was crying silently, standing against the wall. She shook her head. I looked at Marcus. He didn't say anything. He let me handle it. I took a breath. "I don't want your money." I said, "Julia, be reasonable." My father pleaded, "You can use it. You can buy a new car. I have money." I said, "I have a job that pays me for my skills, not my silence. And I have the trust fund Grandpa left me." My parents froze. "You found it," my mother whispered. "He knew you would try to trap me." I said, "So he gave me a key." I leaned over the table, placing my hands flat on the wood. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. "I am not signing anything. I am not helping you. The lawsuit against you is real, and it is happening. You will deal with the consequences of your own actions for the first time in your lives." But my father started. "No." I cut him off. "Here are my terms. You will never contact me again. Not by phone, not by email, not by carrier pigeon. If you have a legal matter, you send it to Marcus. If you try to come to my job, I will get a restraining order. If you try to use my name for anything, a credit card, a library book, a gym membership, I will press charges so fast your head will spin. And," I added, looking at my mother, "you will take down every photo of me on your social media. You will stop posting about how proud you are. You lost the right to be proud of me when you decided I was just a signature to be forged." I picked up my bag. "I am done." I said, "Come on." "Paige," I said to my sister. Paige wiped her eyes. She grabbed her purse. She walked over to me and stood by my side. "You are stealing her too?" My father spat. "She is an adult." "Dad," I said, "she can walk out of the room if she wants to." We walked out. We walked down the hallway, past the receptionist, towards the elevators. Marcus walked with us, a silent, reassuring presence. "Julia." I heard footsteps behind us, rapid, clicking heels. I stopped at the elevator bank. I turned around. My mother was running down the hall. She looked disheveled. Her hair was coming loose from its pin. She stopped a few feet away from us. She was breathing hard. "Julia, please," she said. I waited. I thought she was going to scream. I thought she was going to guilt me. Instead, she looked at me with a profound, terrifying sadness. "I am sorry," she said. The words hung in the air. I waited for the "but." "I am sorry we got caught up," she said. "We just wanted to give you a good life. We wanted to maintain the standard. We didn't want you to worry about us struggling. We thought if we could just get through this rough patch, we could make it up to you." There it was. The self-pity. The justification. "You didn't do it for me, Mom," I said softly. "You did it for the Whitlocks. You did it for the neighbors. You did it for the image. I love you," she said. "You are my daughter." I looked at her. I saw the woman who had raised me. I saw the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes. But I also saw the woman who had practiced my signature on a sheet of printer paper. "I know you love me in your own way," I said, "but your love is too expensive. I cannot afford it anymore." The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. I stepped inside. Paige stepped in beside me. Marcus followed. My mother stood in the hallway, looking small and lost. "Goodbye, Mom," I said. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, cutting off the view of her face. As the elevator descended, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't a sudden burst of joy. It was a gradual release, like a tight corset being unlaced. Paige leaned her head on my shoulder. "I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she whispered. "You told me when it mattered," I said, putting my arm around her. "You were brave today." We walked out of the building into the sunlight. The city noise, the traffic, the construction, the sirens, sounded like music. Marcus shook my hand. "You did good, kid," he said. "I will handle the paperwork. You go live your life." "I will," I said. I dropped Paige off at her apartment. We promised to talk every week. She was going to look for a job in a different city, maybe closer to me. She needed to get away from the blast radius of our parents' implosion. I drove to the airport. I returned the rental car. I went through security. I sat at the gate. I looked at my phone. 0 missed calls. They had finally listened, or maybe they were just too busy calling criminal defense lawyers. Either way, the silence was real this time. I boarded the plane to Harbor Point. I sat in the window seat as the plane taxied down the runway. I thought about the journey. I had started as a daughter waiting for her parents to show up. I had become a victim of identity theft. I had become a fugitive in a strange city. I had become a director of operations. And finally, I had become myself. The plane lifted off. The ground fell away. I looked down at the shrinking city. I saw the roads, the houses, the banks. Somewhere down there, my parents were sitting in a house full of expensive furniture they couldn't afford, blaming the world for their downfall. But I wasn't down there with them. I was up here. I had a job waiting for me. I had a trust fund that gave me a safety net. I had a sister who was waking up. I had a friend named Mara who made excellent tea. And I had a name that was clean, cleared, and entirely mine. I opened the window shade. The clouds were thick and white, illuminated by the sun. I closed my eyes and smiled. I was free, and that was the only inheritance I ever really needed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that empty graduation seat to the elevator doors closing, but I'm glad you walked it with me. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about people standing up for themselves, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too hard on them? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? I read every single thought you share. Stay strong. And remember, never let anyone sign your name for you.